As I mentioned in week 1, The Night is Normal is presented in 4 parts. Part 1 is foundational, helping us reframe the night with hope. And parts 2 through 4 offer biblical and historical examples and practical tools for navigating the night of Part 2, disillusionment with God, Part 3, disillusionment with self, and Part 4, which we enter this week, disillusionment with God's people. Here in week 7, we cover chapters 38 through 44, which begins with an account of disillusionment from God's people in the lives of the Spafford family, considers Old Testament and New Testament examples of spiritual pain within the family of God, and offers 5 of what will be 11 tools for navigating this type of night. In chapter 40, we discuss the 11th commandment, which Jesus told his disciples to love one another. According to John's Gospel, Jesus spoke these words at the Last Supper, a momentous meal attested to in all 4 Gospels, shared by Jesus and his 12 apostles just prior to his arrest. Now, no small thanks to Da Vinci. When we picture this scene, we often imagine Jesus in the middle of a long rectangular table, flanked on his right and left by 12 animated apostles, all seated on the same side of the table with him, which is a great setup for a portrait, but not so great if you're trying to hold a conversation. So for just a moment, let's rewind and rebuild this image in our minds, updating 2 details in particular. First, we probably need to replace the rectangular raised table with a lower serving table, surrounded not with chairs, but with cushions, possibly in a U shape. And second, though all 12 apostles were present while the food was served and while Jesus washed their feet, only 11 were present when Jesus gave this famous command. In John chapter 13, verse 2, we read that the evening meal was being served, and the devil had already prompted Judas Iscariot, son of Simon, to betray Jesus. Then Jesus, knowing who he was, washed the disciples' feet in verses 3 through 17, predicted Judas's betrayal in verses 18 through 27, released Judas to do his deed in verse 27, and then spoke these words in verses 34 to 35 to the 11 still at the table. A new command I give you, love one another. As I have loved you, so you must love one another. By this all men will know that you are my disciples, if you love one another. Why linger over this image? To emphasize that in part 4 of The Night is Normal, my primary focus is spiritual pain that comes from the 11 still at the table. This is not about the Pontius Pilates and the Pharisees and the powerful centurions in our lives, and nor is this about the Judases who have caused us a world of hurt. This is about disillusionment that comes from life together with others who are also following Jesus. As I say in the book, Jesus' hand-chosen leadership team was comprised of men with significant differences politically, socially, and perhaps even theologically. So applying this to our day, around the table, we have a whole lot of differences politically, say in how we vote, and socially in the values that shape our stories and guide our interactions, and theologically, for example, whether we think Jesus would be for or against the latest technological advancements. Life together is complex. And as you've read in The Night is Normal, it's complex even before sin even enters the room. Since humanity together guarantees pain, conflict is a sign not of relational failure, but of relational existence. which is why the first tool that I offer in this part is an encouragement to be slow to assume that sin is always the source of our interpersonal disillusionment in the family of God. Often, it's just plain old life together around God's table. The person with whom I've shared the most years of plain old life together around God's table is my husband. So today, to illustrate the importance of this tool, I'm going to share some fun stories from our marriage. To introduce you to Barry a bit, I'll start with how we met. Though we had been in the same room before, Barry and I first connected at a retreat many years after his first wife had died in a tragic car accident on icy roads. He shared his story in our small group, and I was intrigued. And then I shared a song and a missions update in the service that night, and he was intrigued. And after that service, somehow, we decided to play ping pong together. Now, my spatial intelligence is rather, epically low. Team sports like basketball and soccer, way too many moving pieces for me to process. So I've always gravitated more toward like racquetball and ping pong and bowling and golf, which is such a reasonable sport. All that to say that I grew up playing ping pong. And I grew up playing ping pong with a daddy who never threw a game. My thought, standing across the table that day from Barry, was, Alicia, do not humiliate this man in front of all his friends. Be nice. You may want to marry this guy. And so we played this piddly game of pop-up ping pong. And he won. And I thought, I'll throw one game for a good-looking man, but I will not throw two. And so I asked him, you want to play another game? Sure, he said. So I rolled up my sleeves, I put my hair in a ponytail, and I played ping pong. All the corners, all the spin, everything that I could muster. We tied, he went ahead. We tied, he went ahead. We tied, he went ahead. He won. And I said, well, you're good. Thanks, he said. You're good too. And then he said this. He said, would you like to play the next game? Would you like me to play that one with my right hand? He's right-handed, and he had beaten me with his non-dominant left hand. I may or may not have thrown the ball at him, but inside I thought, he's got spunk, and I like it. And the rest is history. To this day, we still play ping pong and golf and cards and games and pickleball. We love family and travel and books and science fiction movies. And even though we have so much in common, we are still two very different people seated around the same table with Jesus. And this first tool of being slow to assume that sin is the source of conflict has been gold for us. Life together for Barry and I started in a little apartment in Texas. Our differences via nurture and nature made themselves known rather quickly. I remember one specific week, I was in multitask mode. I was folding towels and doing the dishes and setting I was going to say table. We didn't have a table in the beginning, so I would set the floor. I was getting something together for dinner. And Bear comes in and he asks if he can help. Fantastic. I said, thank you. You can start with the beans. Now, my mama, she would soak beans overnight, cook them with ham hocks, pour them over freshly made cornbread with chopped purple onions, but I am not my mama. And in my family, beans come in a can. And so I handed him the pot and I handed him the can, which he proceeded to open, pour into the pot, and then he stirred the pot forever. Picture Alicia still moving 90 miles an hour, zipping around our little apartment, and see Barry stirring the beans and continually looking over at me with a smile that says, isn't this so special that we're doing this together? Can't occasionally winking because it was so special. And family, I'm sorry, that's not what I was thinking. I was not thinking, isn't this special? I was thinking, can't you see everything else I'm doing? Could you, oh, I don't know, stir the beans and put the dishes away? Well, a few days later, we had to send out our newsletters. And Alicia has a system. I mean, I'm assembly line. I've figured out how many of those papers I can fold simultaneously to still get that nice crisp edge. I'm stuffing in envelopes, times of the essence. And my sweet husband is standing there with one page at a time, folding it perfectly, all the while smiling at me, thinking, isn't this so special? Okay, so early on in our marriage, we made a decision that if we ever came to a point where we just couldn't seem to figure something out, we would designate someone and we would talk with them. We were at a conference and there was a man who was a lot like Barry, very, very intelligent, very, very relational. And I thought, you know what? I think I need to talk to his wife. And so I asked her for a couple of minutes at the end of the conference. And I am not going to mention her name. She wouldn't want me to. She is so embarrassed by how blunt she was, but her bluntness is exactly what I needed. The conversation went something like this. I said, you know, I think that our husbands are very, very similar, so relational, so kind, so intelligent, but just not so efficient. And so I wanted to know, you guys have been married for such a long time. How did you go about helping your husband, become more like, well, you? And I was about to have a mentoring moment. She looked at me and she said, who made you the standard for all godliness and efficiency? What? I thought for sure she had misunderstood the situation. So I re-explained the whole thing all over again. And she said, you heard me the first time. Who made you the standard for all godliness and efficiency? Her rebuke was God's grace to me and to my marriage, because through it, I realized that I had been spiritualizing personality, specifically mine. Surely more efficient was more godly, right? Surely more orderly was more Christ-like, isn't it? And perhaps that's one of the reasons why it's so easy to blame all the trouble around the table on sin and Satan. Because we, like me, tend to over-spiritualize our personalities. The truth is, I was multitasking because that was simply the way nurture wired me, not because I loved God more. Barry was the one God sent to mentor me in the power of being present, even if the price was a decrease in productivity. Early on in our marriage, Barry modeled another principle for me that has helped us avoid over-spiritualizing not only our personalities, but conflict in general. For Barry, when he was growing up, okay was a perfectly adequate response to the question, how was your day? So he was a little surprised early on in our marriage when okay did not stop the flow of all of my questions. One night, a few months into our marriage, after a very, very full day of ministry, we were riding the bus from campus back to our little apartment. And I asked him, how was your day? And he said, okay. And I said, oh, well, what did you do? I met with the guys. Who'd you meet with? I met with Mario and Travis and Anthony and John. Oh, wow. Where'd you guys meet? We met at the Union like we normally do. What'd you guys talk about? Poor Barry, he felt absolutely overwhelmed by my quest to learn about and process his day. And so while I rattled on cluelessly, Barry remembers looking out the window and holding this inner conversation with God. He said, Lord, this is exhausting. I've never been asked this many questions in my whole life. And he felt the Lord say this back to him. He felt the Lord say, I know, son. Alicia really values details. It's one of her love languages. Can you give them to her as a gift to me? And so Barry took a deep breath and made a commitment that he has kept to this day. He decided to value what I valued and give me the gift of details, even though details were not on his list. Yet, now the tables have turned. Now, when I'm speaking somewhere, he'll call and he'll go, "Babe, how did it go? I was praying." And I'm like, "Oh, God was with us." And he'll say, "Oh, no, 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 you do not get off that easy. Details, girl. I need details." You see, if we choose to value something long enough, and I'm going to say that again, if we choose to value something long enough, it becomes valuable to us. Choices are powerful things. Back in the beginning of our life together, Barry could have made a different choice. And frankly, we would have had a very different relationship. I saw that vividly played out once in a heartbreaking story. And that began with two leaders over-spiritualizing their personalities, just as I had mine. Like Barry and I, they were very different, but those differences made them an incredibly effective team. One was deliberate, logical, disciplined. The other took life as it came, was empathetic and spontaneous. The logical soul needed the compassionate soul to finish just one of the many unfinished projects and to attempt to balance the organizational checkbook on occasion. And the compassionate soul needed the logical soul to take some risks and be open to doing something that hadn't been planned for a year. But instead of choosing to value what the other valued, compassion said to logic, "You need to lighten up." And logic said to compassion, "Well, you need to grow up." And the disillusionment deepened to a divide, and it ended in disaster. Only God knows how much unnecessary disillusionment Barry's decision to value what I valued has helped us avoid. He set in motion a foundational principle in our marriage and ministry of choosing to give each other gifts. When it comes to disillusionment that's rooted in spiritually neutral but still difficult differences, being slow to blame sin and willing to give gifts can be a game changer. Such choices don't make the challenges disappear, but it does help us go the way of love. And love, like obedience, is never sown in vain. Until next week.